What would you do if a wounded dog led you to a secret that shattered your understanding of your family's past? Deep in the frost-bitten wilderness, a former soldier named Elena stumbles upon a mystery that will unravel her solitude and rewrite her destiny. After a decade of serving her country, Elena sought refuge in her late grandfather's cabin, hoping to escape the haunting echoes of war. But when a blizzard brings an unexpected visitor, a battered husky with piercing amber eyes, she's thrust into a journey of courage, connection, and shocking revelations that will leave you breathless. Elena's story is one of resilience, love, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. A tale that honors the sacrifices of veterans who've given so much for our country. We're Daily Narrated Stories, and we're so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers. Please hit that subscribe button and join us as we share more heartfelt narratives like this one with the world. Elena had served 10 years in the military, surviving 2 tours in conflict zones before a roadside bomb ended her career with a medical discharge. The memories of those days, screams of her squad, the searing heat of explosions, still jolted her awake most nights, leaving her trembling in a cold sweat. Her grandfather's cabin, tucked away in a dense forest of towering firs, was supposed to be her haven, a place to silence the chaos in her mind. She craved solitude, far from the pitying stares and questions from those who could never grasp the weight of her scars. The cabin smelled of aged pine and memories, its walls adorned with faded photographs of her grandfather's fishing trips, a stark contrast to the sterile barracks she'd left behind. Each creak of the floorboards under her boots echoed the loneliness she'd chosen, a self-imposed exile to mend her fractured spirit. But on a frigid night, as a howling storm raged outside, a faint scratching at the cabin door broke through the wind's fury. Elena, a former Marine lieutenant, reached for the dagger she kept under her pillow, her calloused hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her veins. The sound grew weaker, more desperate, as if whatever was out there was clinging to its last moments of life. She flipped on the porch light, cracked the door, and froze. There, against the snow's blinding white, lay a husky, its fur matted with blood and frost, amber eyes glowing with a haunting intensity. The dog's gaze pierced through the walls Elena had built around her heart, stirring a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: connection. "Hey, buddy," Elena whispered, her voice rough from days of silence. The dog whimpered, trying to rise, but collapsing in a heap. Instinct kicked in, years of combat medic training overriding her hesitation. She scooped the animal into her arms, surprised by how frail it felt despite its size, and brought it inside. The husky, whom she later named Shadow from the faint engraving on its worn leather collar, seemed to trust her completely, its body going limp as if it had finally found safety. The weight of him in her arms reminded her of carrying injured comrades, a memory that tightened her throat as she laid him on the table. Elena cleared her dining table, spreading out towels and her medical kit. Shadow's amber eyes followed her every move, unblinking as she cleaned his wounds. Deep claw marks suggested a predator attack, perhaps a bear or a cougar, but other injuries chilled her to the core. Precise incisions and burn marks, unmistakably human-made. "Who did this to you?" she murmured, her stomach twisting with anger. Shadow's gaze held a depth that unnerved her, as if he understood her words and carried a secret he couldn't voice. The flickering firelight cast shadows across his matted fur, highlighting the cruelty etched into his body. Elena's hands trembled, not from fear, but from a protective rage she hadn't felt since her last mission. The scent of antiseptic mixed with the smoky aroma of the fire, grounding her as she worked methodically, stitching up the worst of the wounds with the precision of a battlefield medic. Each stitch felt like a promise, to Shadow, to herself, that she wouldn't let this cruelty go unanswered. As the night wore on, Elena made a bed for Shadow by the fireplace, using blankets and a makeshift meal of soaked jerky and water. She sat in an armchair nearby, unable to sleep, her eyes darting to the dog with every creak of the cabin. "You're safe now," she told him, the irony of her words not lost on her. She, too, had come here to escape her own ghosts. Shadow's presence stirred something in her, a flicker of purpose she hadn't felt since leaving the military. The crackling fire warmed the room, but Elena's mind raced with questions. Who could have hurt this dog so deliberately? And why did his eyes seem to plead for her to follow him? The storm outside raged on, the wind howling like a chorus of lost souls, mirroring the turmoil in her own heart. She pulled her grandfather's old quilt tighter around her shoulders, the fabric worn but comforting as she watched Shadow's chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. Sleep came in fragments, each time Elena waking to check on Shadow. Around midnight, she noticed him shift, his ears twitching toward the window, facing the dark forest, a low whine escaping his throat. The storm outside howled louder, the wind rattling the cabin's windows as if trying to break in. By morning, the blizzard had worsened, but Shadow seemed stronger, his focus on the window growing more intense. When Elena approached, he thumped his tail weakly, a gesture of trust that warmed her hardened heart. She knelt beside him, her fingers brushing his fur, and felt a pang of guilt for the solitude she'd sought. This dog needed her, and she couldn't ignore the pull in his gaze. The icy air seeping through the window pane sent a shiver down her spine, a stark reminder of the harsh world beyond her sanctuary. She whispered to Shadow, "What's out there, boy? What are you trying to tell me?" His amber eyes met hers, unwavering, as if urging her to trust him. "I'll check outside," she said, slipping into military mode as she bundled up against the biting cold. She scanned the perimeter, hoping to find tracks of Shadow's attacker, but the snow had buried any clues. The forest was a sea of white, the trees bowing under the weight of the storm, their branches creaking like whispers of warning. Back inside, Shadow had dragged himself to the window, pawing at the glass with a desperate whine. "It's just snow out there," Elena said, but his agitation only grew, his claws scraping the frame as if pleading with her to understand. She watched him, her chest tightening with a mix of curiosity and dread. What was out there that had this dog so fixated? The glass was fogged with her breath as she leaned closer, peering into the endless white, her mind racing with possibilities, none of them comforting. She couldn't shake the feeling that Shadow was leading her towards something she wasn't prepared to face. This pattern continued all day, Shadow resting, then mustering his strength to stand at the window, always facing the same direction, deeper into the woods. By evening, Elena couldn't ignore it anymore. Something had happened to this dog out there, something that left scars far beyond the physical. "I get it," she said softly, sitting beside him, her hand resting on his matted fur. "The kind of wounds that don't show." That night, her dreams were a chaotic blur of gunfire and fallen comrades, the scent of burning metal filling her lungs. She woke gasping, sweat-soaked despite the cabin's chill, but Shadow's cold nose against her hand pulled her back from the brink. His amber eyes glowed in the dim light, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. The memory of her last mission flashed vividly. The explosion, the screams, the blood on her hands. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, as she fought to steady her breathing. Shadow whimpered softly, pressing closer, his warmth a lifeline in the darkness of her memories. The blizzard kept them trapped for another day, and with no phone service or charged satellite phone, Elena felt the weight of their isolation. Shadow's strength slowly returned, though his urgency at the window only intensified. By the third day, his soft barks carried a restrained urgency, as if he feared being heard by the wrong ears. "What's out there, boy?" Elena asked, kneeling beside him. Shadow's amber eyes met hers, brimming with an almost human resolve, and he limped to the door, looking back expectantly. She hesitated, her fingers brushing the scar along her jaw, a reminder of the life she'd left behind. She'd come here to avoid complications, to shield herself from the world. But Shadow's determination mirrored the grit she'd seen in soldiers who pushed through pain for a mission. She thought of her squad, the ones who didn't make it, and the promise she'd made to never leave anyone behind. Shadow's gaze felt like a call to that promise, a silent plea she couldn't ignore. "Fine," she said, packing a bag with survival gear. First aid, food, water, a flashlight, and her rifle. She dressed in layers, strapped on her dagger, and checked her weapon with the precision of a soldier preparing for battle. The cold air bit at her skin as she opened the door, but Shadow didn't hesitate. He stepped into the snow and headed toward the tree line, looking back to ensure she followed. "I must be crazy," Elena muttered, securing the cabin before following the determined husky into the silent, snow-draped forest. The woods were eerily quiet, the snow muffling every sound except the crunch of Elena's boots and Shadow's lighter steps. He moved with purpose, pausing to ensure she followed, his nose occasionally dipping to the snow as if following an invisible trail. The air was sharp, each breath stinging her lungs, and the weight of her rifle across her shoulder was both a comfort and a burden. She scanned the forest with a soldier's vigilance, her senses heightened, every shadow a potential threat. An hour into their journey, Elena's legs ached from trudging through the deep snow, her breath coming in short, visible puffs. She paused to adjust her scarf, the icy wind cutting through her layers, when she spotted strange marks on a tree. 3 parallel scratches, too deliberate to be natural. "Someone made these," she whispered, her gloved fingers tracing the grooves. Her heart raced as she imagined who, or what, might have left them. Shadow barked softly, urging her onward, his amber eyes glinting with determination. 20 yards later, she found more identical markings, a hidden path through the wilderness. The realization sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. This wasn't a random trail, but a deliberate marker, a sign of human presence in this desolate place. She tightened her grip on her rifle, her mind racing with questions. Was Shadow leading her to his abuser, or something worse? The light faded as they ventured deeper, the winter day drawing to a close with alarming speed. The temperature plummeted, and Elena's breath fogged in the air, her fingers numbing inside her gloves. "Shadow, we might need to turn back," she called, her voice swallowed by the vast silence of the forest. But the dog pressed on, his pace quickening toward a faint wisp of smoke rising through the trees. Elena's heart pounded as she followed, her boots sinking deeper into the snow with each step. The smoke grew thicker, a thin gray thread against the darkening sky, and a sense of foreboding settled in her chest. Someone was out here, in this remote stretch of wilderness, and Shadow was leading her straight to them. In a small clearing stood a run-down cabin, its walls weathered gray, one window boarded up, the faint glow of a fire within the only sign of life. The structure looked abandoned, its sagging porch buried under snow, but the smoke curling from the chimney told a different story. Shadow's demeanor shifted. His ears perked, tail wagging tentatively, but his body tense with apprehension, as if he were caught between hope and fear. "You know this place," Elena whispered, crouching beside him, her hand resting on his back. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the rapid beat of his heart beneath her fingers. Her military training kicked in as she surveyed the clearing with a tactical eye. The snow around the cabin was undisturbed, but a heavy chain and padlock secured the door, sending a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Someone's locked inside. She breathed, her pulse quickening with the realization. Shadow scratched at the door with sudden urgency, his whines growing more desperate, his claws leaving faint marks in the weathered wood. Elena used her multi-tool to break the lock, her movements swift despite the risk of noise. She winced at the faint clink of metal, her eyes scanning the clearing for any sign of movement, half expecting an ambush. Inside, the cabin was dim and cold, the air thick with neglect and the faint scent of sickness. Stale sweat and unwashed linens mixed with the smoky residue of a dying fire. The walls were bare, save for a few rusted nails where pictures might have once hung, and the floor was covered in a thin layer of dust, disturbed only by a narrow path between the fireplace and the door. Shadow darted to a back room, whining softly, his tail low but his movements purposeful. Elena followed, her rifle at the ready, her boots creaking on the uneven floorboards. She pushed open the door to find an elderly man, Theodore, lying motionless on a bed, his wrist handcuffed to the metal frame, his face gaunt and pale beneath a tangle of white hair. Shadow nudged him gently, whimpering with what sounded like grief, and Elena's heart clenched. She knew this man meant everything to the dog. She found a key hanging on a nail by the doorway, her fingers fumbling in her haste to free Theodore. The cuff fell away with a soft click, revealing raw, scab skin beneath, a testament to months of struggle. She assessed his condition: severe hypothermia, dehydration, and malnutrition. His skin was ice-cold to the touch, his breathing shallow and irregular, and his lips were tinged blue, a stark contrast to the pallor of his face. A leather-bound journal on the table caught her eye, its pages filled with shaky handwriting. Dated entries spanning months revealed Theodore's imprisonment by his nephew, Marcus, over mining claim documents. December 10th, Elena read quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus came today, brought supplies, but took the radio again. Says it needs fixing, but I know he's lying. 3 months in this prison now. He thinks I'll tell him where the documents are. I'll die first. Her concern deepened with each entry, the words painting a picture of betrayal and greed. She flipped through the pages, her anger growing as she read of Marcus's threats, his cruelty toward both Theodore and Shadow, and Theodore's unwavering resolve to protect the documents at all costs. The final entry, dated just 3 days prior, sent a shiver down her spine. Storm coming. Marcus dropped minimal supplies, threatened Shadow when he growled. I fear for him if Marcus returns. The fire won't last much longer. So cold now. Margaret, I'm sorry I never returned to you. Theodore stirred, his voice a faint whisper as he murmured a name. Margaret, mistaking Elena for someone else. His eyes, clouded with confusion, fluttered open, revealing pale blue irises that seemed to look through her. I'm Elena, she said gently, her voice soft with compassion as she placed a hand on his frail shoulder. Shadow led me to you. Theodore's gaze cleared slightly, a flicker of recognition in his weathered features. Shadow, good boy, he murmured, his voice cracked and faint, barely audible over the crackle of the dying fire. He warned that Marcus might return soon, his words laced with fear, his frail hand trembling as he gripped the edge of the blanket. At that moment, Shadow growled, his hackles rising as movement appeared outside. Elena's grip on her rifle tightened, her senses on high alert as a shadow passed by the window, the faint crunch of snow underfoot sending her heart into overdrive. A man entered, a burly figure in expensive gear, his face hardening as he saw Elena and Shadow. Who are you? He demanded, his voice a low growl. But Shadow lunged, snarling with a ferocity Elena hadn't seen in him before, forcing the man back against the doorframe with a thud. Elena held her rifle steady, her finger resting alongside the trigger guard, disciplined but ready. The dog has strong opinions about you, she said, her voice cold as ice, her eyes locked on the man's every move. The man, Marcus, claimed Theodore had dementia, spinning a tale of concern for his uncle's safety with a practiced ease that might have fooled someone less perceptive. He wandered off during the last storm, Marcus said, his tone dripping with false worry. I've been so worried. He gets confused, might hurt himself. But the journal in Theodore's condition told a different story. Months of captivity, neglect, and abuse, the evidence of which was written in the raw sores on Theodore's wrist and the hollowed-out look in his eyes. Elena didn't lower her rifle, her gaze unwavering. Dementia patients don't usually need to be handcuffed to their beds, she countered, her voice steady but laced with disgust. Shadow's growling intensified, his body low to the ground, ready to strike, as Marcus edged back toward the door, his facade beginning to crack. The confrontation escalated as Marcus's hand moved toward his jacket pocket, his movements slow but deliberate. Elena's training kicked in, her eyes narrowing as she tracked his every motion. "Don't," she warned, raising her rifle slightly. But Marcus was already drawing a pistol, his eyes glinting with desperation. Elena reacted instantly, her training taking over as she surged forward, knocking his arm upward with the barrel of her rifle. The shot splintered the cabin's ceiling, sending a shower of dust and wood fragments raining down, and she drove her shoulder in his chest, slamming him against the door frame with a force that rattled the walls. Shadow clamped his jaws around Marcus's wrist, his teeth sinking into flesh with a snarl, forcing him to drop the weapon with a cry of pain. Elena kicked the pistol across the floor, her movements swift and precise. Before using her rifle to pin Marcus to the wall, the barrel pressed horizontally against his throat. "Tell me everything," Elena demanded, her voice a low growl, her eyes burning with a fierce determination. Marcus's facade crumbled as he confessed to imprisoning Theodore for mining claims worth millions in gold. "My father built that mine," he spat, his voice dripping with entitlement, his face contorted with a mix of pain and defiance. Theodore was just a silent partner. He contributed nothing but initial capital. "It's my birthright." Elena's disgust was palpable, her jaw clenching as she pressed the rifle harder against his throat, just enough to make her point. "So you tortured an old man and his dog for money?" she asked, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. Marcus's eyes narrowed, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. But before he could respond, he grabbed a kerosene lantern from the shelf beside him, his movements frantic. "Let me talk to my uncle alone, or we all go up in flames," he snarled, flicking a lighter with a trembling hand, the small flame casting an eerie glow across his face. Elena moved to stop him, her heart pounding as she lunged forward, but Shadow tackled Marcus's legs, throwing him off balance with a ferocious growl. The lantern shattered against the floor, flames erupting across the dry wood with a whoosh, the heat immediate and intense. The fire spread with terrifying speed, the aged timber crackling and popping as the flames devoured it, the heat scorching Elena's skin as thick black smoke filled the cabin. Marcus scrambled for his pistol, shouting accusations through the haze. "You've ruined everything." But Elena had only seconds to act. Her eyes darted to the bedroom, where Theodore lay helpless, the flames already licking at the doorframe, the air growing hotter with each passing moment. She chose Theodore, rushing to the bedroom as the fire roared behind her, the smoke burning her lungs with every breath. Wrapping him in a survival blanket, she lifted him in a fireman's carry, his frail body alarmingly light, his shallow breaths barely audible over the crackling inferno. "Shadow, door," she commanded, her voice hoarse, and the husky led the way through the blaze, the heat singeing Elena's eyebrows as they burst into the freezing night, the cold air a sharp contrast to the hell they'd escaped. Outside, Elena staggered under Theodore's weight, her legs trembling as she set him down in the snow, the cabin now a blazing pyre illuminating the clearing with a hellish orange glow. The flames roared, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky, the heat still intense even at a distance. Marcus stumbled out moments later, his clothes smoldering, collapsing in the snow with a cry of pain as he beat at the embers on his jacket. Elena's chest heaved as she caught her breath, her eyes scanning the scene with a soldier's clarity. They were miles from help, the storm still swirling lightly around them, and Theodore's condition was critical. She couldn't risk moving him through the forest in his state, but Marcus remained a threat, his eyes glinting with malice even as he clutched his burned arm. With no way to reach help immediately, Elena secured Marcus to a tree with his own handcuffs, her movements precise despite the chaos, the metal clicking shut with a satisfying finality. "Fitting, isn't it?" she said coldly, her breath visible in the frigid air, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Now you know how your uncle felt." Shadow led them to a nearby woodshed, a cramped but dry shelter with stacked firewood lining one wall and old tools hanging from pegs. The air inside was musty, smelling of damp wood and rust, but it offered a reprieve from the biting wind. Elena cleared a space on the earthen floor, laying down her emergency blanket and placing Theodore upon it with care. Shadow curled up beside him, his warmth a lifeline in the bitter cold, his amber eyes watching Elena with a quiet trust that steadied her. She activated a portable heating pad from her pack, placing it near Theodore's core to help raise his body temperature. But she knew it wasn't enough. Theodore's breathing was labored, his voice weak as he revealed the mining documents were hidden in his boot. Elena retrieved them, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the yellowed papers, the official seals and signatures barely legible in the dim light. "Margaret Winter, my partner," Theodore whispered, his eyes distant, his voice barely a breath. The name struck Elena like a lightning bolt. Margaret Winter was her grandfather's sister, her great-aunt, who had passed away 2 years prior. Theodore's eyes widened, a spark of recognition in his frail gaze. "You're her kin. You have her strength," he said, his voice trembling with awe, a faint smile touching his cracked lips. He explained their engagement before Vietnam, his capture as a POW, and how he'd thought Margaret had moved on when he returned. "I was reported killed in action," he said, his voice breaking as a tear slipped down his weathered cheek. "By the time I came home in '73, she was gone. I searched for her, but..." He trailed off, his strength fading, but his grip on Elena's hand tightened, as if anchoring himself to the present. "I never stopped looking for her," he murmured, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, the weight of 50 lost years etched into every line of his face. Elena's throat tightened, her own grief for her great-aunt mingling with Theodore's, a shared sorrow that bound them in that moment. She tucked the documents into her pocket, her mind reeling with the implications, the weight of history pressing down on her. As the night deepened, Theodore's condition worsened, the cold seeping into the woodshed despite Elena's efforts. She piled more blankets around him, her hands shaking as she checked his pulse, her medic training telling her he was slipping closer to the edge. She weighed her options. Moving him risked his life, but staying might be equally fatal. Before leaving her cabin, she'd activated an emergency beacon, a habit from her military days, hoping it would bring help, but the storm had delayed any response. The woodshed's walls creaked under the wind's assault, the cold seeping through the cracks, and Elena's breath fogged in the air as she sat beside Theodore, her rifle across her lap. Shadow's presence was a quiet comfort, his body pressed against Theodore's, but his amber eyes darted to the door as if sensing something Elena couldn't. She whispered to him, "We'll get through this, boy." Her voice a mix of determination and fear, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. Shadow suddenly perked up, his tail wagging as he pawed at the door, his ears twitching at a sound Elena couldn't yet hear. She rose, her rifle at the ready, her heart pounding as she listened intently. At first, there was nothing but the howl of the wind, but then, faintly but distinctly, she heard voices, human voices calling out, "Hello, anyone out there? Search and rescue." Relief surged through Elena, so powerfully it weakened her knees, a sob catching in her throat as she threw open the woodshed door. "Here!" she shouted, her voice raw with emotion, as Shadow bolted out, barking in greeting, his tail wagging furiously as he ran toward the voices through the snow. Elena followed, her rifle slung over her shoulder, waving her arms as the bobbing beams of flashlights appeared through the trees, the figures of the rescue team materializing like a lifeline in the darkness. Relief flooded Elena as the team rushed to stabilize Theodore, their movements swift and professional as they wrapped him in thermal blankets and started in 4. They airlifted him to Crestview Medical Center, with Shadow and Elena alongside. The helicopters roared deafening but comforting, a promise of safety after the night's ordeal. Shadow remained calm, pressed against Elena's leg, his eyes fixed on Theodore's unconscious form, a silent guardian even in the chaos. At the hospital, Theodore was treated for hypothermia and pneumonia, his condition stabilizing under the care of skilled doctors. Elena sat by his bedside, Shadow at her feet, as Theodore shared more about his past with Margaret. They'd been engaged, torn apart by war and a mistaken death report. "We had it all planned," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, his frail hand clutching hers. "A spring wedding, a house in town, a family." The sheriff confirmed Marcus's crimes, and the mining documents were secured as evidence, proving Margaret and Theodore's joint ownership, a legacy that had survived decades of separation. Over the next weeks, Elena visited Theodore daily, bringing Shadow, who refused to leave his side. Theodore shared stories of Margaret's youth, painting a picture of a vibrant woman Elena wished she'd known better. "She loved wildflowers," he said one day, his eyes bright with memory, a faint smile playing on his lips. "We'd pick them by the river, dreaming of our future." The stories filled Elena with a bittersweet longing, a connection to a family history she'd never known. She listened intently, her heart aching for the life Margaret and Theodore had planned, the dreams that war had stolen from them. One day, Shadow led her to a locked shed behind her cabin, his amber eyes insistent as he pawed at the door, his tail wagging with a quiet urgency. Inside, Elena found a box marked personal, filled with Margaret's keepsakes, letters, photos, and an engagement ring, proof of a love that never faded. The ring was simple, a single diamond set in gold, its band worn but shining with a timeless beauty. Theodore wept as he held it, his hands trembling as he whispered, "She never forgot me," his voice breaking with a mix of grief and wonder. Elena and Theodore grew closer, two veterans from different wars finding solace in shared scars. They sat together in the hospital room, the beeping of the monitors a steady backdrop to their conversations. "I still dream of the prison camp sometimes," Theodore admitted one evening, his voice soft, his eyes distant as he stared out the window at the snowy mountains beyond. Elena nodded, her fingers tracing the scar on her jaw, a habit she couldn't break. "I dream of the convoy, the explosion. Only 3 of us made it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, the memory as raw as ever. They sat in silence, the weight of their experiences a bridge between them, a shared understanding that needed no words. She invited him to live in the cabin, and they settled into a routine, Shadow their constant guardian, his presence a balm to their wounded souls. The mining claim was leased responsibly, the profits funding veteran and animal charities, a tribute to their journey and a way to give back to those who had sacrificed so much. Spring brought renewal, the cabin transforming into a true home as Elena renovated it, her heart lighter than it had been in years, the scent of fresh paint and blooming wildflowers filling the air. One evening, as they sat on the porch, the sky painted in hues of purple and gold, Theodore held a photo of Margaret, his voice soft and reverent. "I think Shadow was her way of bringing us together. Too many coincidences otherwise," he said, his weathered finger tracing Margaret's young face, a tear glistening in his eye. Elena nodded, stroking Shadow's fur, the husky's amber eyes reflecting the fading light. "Whatever it was, I'm grateful. I came here to hide, but I found a family instead," she said, her voice thick with emotion, a smile tugging at her lips as she looked at Theodore. That night, Elena slept peacefully for the first time since her discharge, the echoes of war replaced by the warmth of connection, the soft sound of Shadow's breathing at the foot of her bed, a comforting rhythm. Theodore slept with Margaret's ring on his nightstand, his dreams filled with hope rather than loss, the photograph of his lost love, a silent promise of reunion in another life. This story reminds us that healing often comes through unexpected bonds, between a veteran and a dog, between generations, between past and present. It's a testament to the courage of veterans like Elena and Theodore, who've sacrificed so much for our freedom, and to the loyalty of animals like Shadow, who remind us of the power of love. Reflect on the veterans in your life. How can you honor their sacrifices? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your stories of gratitude and connection. At Daily Narrated Stories, we're committed to bringing you tales that inspire and uplift, stories that remind us of the resilience of the human spirit. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, but we need your help to get there. Don't miss this chance. subscribe now, leave a comment, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Let's build a community of story lovers together before this opportunity slips away.